Welcome to Outlaw Woodworking. Come on in, let's make something. Welcome to Outlaw Woodworking. Today I'm going to show you how I made this San Juan River 3D fish sign. I've got some flies on each side, and don't laugh at the paint job. I painted it myself and I'm a lousy painter, but it was fun to do. Anyway, yeah, this is a piece of scrap spalted maple that I had, and I'm really happy with the way it turned out. Anyway, yeah, let me show you how I did it. Let's get started. The first thing I do is take my scrap piece of spalted maple and I get it all squared up really nice. Once I got it all square, it was time to surface it. Now, one important thing about doing any kind of 3D carving on the CNC machine is to surface your material prior to running your program, prior to cutting your 3D image. The material needs to be super flat. Right here I'm actually locking it down with some Rockler T-track clamps, and that seems to work pretty good. The next thing I do is I do the XYZ with a 6210 surfacing bit. This is a 3-bladed 1-inch bit by Whiteside, and I'll show you a picture of it right here. Next thing I do, I run the program and I surface the top of this spalted maple. And like I said, that's an important part of doing any kind of carving, is making sure your surface is aligned with your cutter. Next up was to do the 3D roughing toolpath, and this is an 1/8 inch downcut spiral bit, and I'll show you a picture of it right here. Now, this whole process of doing the 3D fish on this big of a piece of wood took about, I think, a total of 4 or 5 hours to complete this 3D. And right here you can see it's cutting. That's the 1/8 inch downcut spiral bit, and it's going to do the roughing pass. And I believe this is 20 times speed actually. So it did take a little time to get this roughing toolpath done. Here you can see it's on the final stages of the roughing toolpath, and I believe it made quite a few passes to get to this point. But like I said, it was probably 2 or 3 hours to do this roughing toolpath on this big of a fish. Next up, it was time to Z out the ball nose. It's an 1/8 inch ball nose by Amana, and I'll show you a picture of it right here. And this took a good 2.5 to 3 hours to run this finishing toolpath. And you can see the detail, the fish detail is really coming out nice. And that has a lot to do with surfacing your material ahead of time. And this, I have the most success with the finishing toolpath by just going back and forth. That seems to work the best for me. Let me know in the comments what you do with your 3D, how you run your programs. I'd be curious to learn a little more about it. But this spalted maple, it really has a nice look to it. Now in the future, I'm going to start doing them out of a darker wood and staining them instead of hand painting them, because the hand painting takes a long time and I'm not really that good at it. Right there you can see it finishes up the 3D finishing toolpath. And now it's time to XYZ. Actually, we ended up just XYZing with a straight cut bit, and then we put the V-carve bit to basically go ahead and run. And I Z out with the V-carve bit. And right here you can see we're cutting the letters San Juan River, and we're cutting out these little flies. And that turned out pretty good. Next up, we need to epoxy the letters and the 2 little flies. Originally I was going to do 3 different colors, but I ended up just doing 2 different colors. I did the San Juan River letters in a black color, and I'm using eye candy pigment, and that seems to turn out pretty good. Now previously, when I epoxied the last project, I used hot glue to keep the epoxy from running into any other places I didn't want it to run into. But the problem was the hot glue really gummed up my sandpaper when I was sanding it off. So this time I decided just to tape around the epoxied areas, and that seemed to actually work good, and it peeled off real easy, and that was a lot better. Right here you can see I get it all taped, and next up was to mix the epoxy and pour it in. First up is going to be some black. I forget the name of it, but it's made by Eye Candy. Actually, it looks like I'm doing the flies first in a green color. I actually thought the flies kind of added a little character to the sign, and I was happy I did that. Right there you can see I'm epoxying both flies. Next up we mix the black. This epoxy is tabletop epoxy made by Super Clear, and I've been really happy with it. It cures really hard 24 hours later, and you can pretty much sand it the next day. Probably the main thing to do is make sure you mix it really thoroughly, and then have your room temperature 70, and it seems to work pretty good. Right there I'm pouring in the black. The next day I sand off all the epoxy and basically get it down smooth. I start out with about 80 grit and then go up to about 200 grit, and I sand the whole thing. Right here I attempt to hand paint this, and I'm using about 7 different colors, and it's a tedious little process, and I'm not a very good painter. Let me know what you think of the fish in the comments. But yeah, right here I go ahead and paint the entire 3D model. Right here I apply 5 coats of polyurethane. This is a water-based polyurethane, and I basically just let it dry in between coats and apply the next one, and that seems to come out okay. Thanks for watching Outlaw Woodworking. I hope you liked the video. Please subscribe, like it, hit the bell, and I will see you next time. I'm going to hang this up in my CNC shop just because I think it'd be fun to look at when I'm in there. And yeah, I know the paint job, I'm not a good painter, but it's still kind of fun to look at, and I had fun making it. Anyway, thanks again for watching, and I will see you next time. Later.